75-year-old Jerry Suttle thought she was alone in the world, facing a jail sentence for the overgrown weeds in her yard. Then, four boys showed up unannounced, and what they did next brought the widowed Texan to tears, but not the kind you'd expect. The Texan sun beat down on Rockdale, baking the cracked earth of the 2-acre lot surrounding the small, weathered house. Inside, Jerry Suttle, 75 years of weathered skin and memories, moved with the slow, deliberate grace of someone who had seen too many seasons pass. The house, once vibrant with laughter and the scent of George's pipe tobacco, now echoed only with the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a relentless reminder of time's passage. She stepped out onto the porch, the warped wood groaning beneath her worn slippers. Her gaze drifted to the overgrown garden, a riot of weeds and tangled vines that had once been her pride and joy. Roses, George's favorite, fought valiantly against the encroaching wilderness, their blooms pale and sparse, like ghosts of a forgotten summer. 50 years. 50 years they had spent in this house, coaxing life from the stubborn Texas soil. She remembered the day they'd arrived, young and full of dreams, the house a blank canvas, the land a promise. George, with his strong hands and gentle heart, had built the rose garden, a haven of beauty amidst the harsh landscape. He'd planted each bush with meticulous care, whispering promises of love and longevity to the thorny stems. Jerry ran a trembling hand over a withered rose, its petals brittle and dry. 10 years. 10 years since the heart attack had stolen him away, leaving her with the silence and the garden, both growing wilder with each passing year. The silence she could bear. It was a familiar companion. But the garden was a constant, aching reminder of what she had lost. It was a physical manifestation of her grief, a sprawling tapestry of neglect woven with threads of sorrow. She tried, in the early years, to keep up with it, but her aging body protested with every bend and stretch. The Texas heat became a relentless enemy, and the weeds seemed to multiply with malicious glee. Slowly, inexorably, the garden had slipped from her grasp, becoming a wild, untamed thing, a reflection of the wilderness growing within her own heart. There was a darkness creeping in around the edges of things, not sinister, not yet, a subtle dimming, a quiet unknown. She'd receive occasional, worried glances from neighbors as they drove by, their expressions a mixture of pity and concern. But Jerry preferred the solitude. She'd become a recluse, a shadow flitting through the overgrown paths of her own life, the world shrinking to the confines of her 2 acres and the ghosts that whispered in the rose garden. The ghosts of laughter, of love, of a life that was no more. She felt them most strongly at dusk, a chilling, yet not uncomfortable, presence. The day began like any other. Jerry rose with the sun, her joints creaking in protest. She made a weak cup of coffee, the aroma a pale imitation of the rich brew George used to make. She watered the few struggling houseplants that remained, their leaves drooping in silent sympathy. She tried to tend to a small patch of tomatoes, but her back ached, and the weeds seemed to mock her efforts. The afternoon brought an unexpected intrusion. A sharp rap on the door, followed by the rumble of a heavy engine, shattered the quiet. Jerry hesitated, her heart beating a nervous tattoo against her ribs. Visitors were rare and unwelcome. She peered through the curtains, her breath catching in her throat. A police car, black and white and undeniably official, sat parked at the edge of her overgrown lawn. Officer Bailey, a man whose youthful face seemed perpetually etched with a weary frown, stood on her porch. He held a piece of paper, its official-looking print stark against the faded wood of her door. Jerry opened the door cautiously, her hand trembling on the knob. "Mrs. Suttle?" His voice was polite but firm. "Yes." Her voice was a thin whisper, barely audible above the buzzing of the cicadas. "I'm here regarding a violation of City Ordinance 14B," he said, his gaze sweeping over the overgrown lawn. "Failure to maintain property. Specifically, grass and weeds exceeding 18 inches in height." Jerry stared at him, bewildered. Violation? He held out the paper. It was a notice informing her of the violation and the potential fines. But beneath that, in smaller print, was something far more alarming. A summons. A court date she had missed. A warrant for her arrest. The blood drained from Jerry's face. Arrest? For overgrown grass? It seemed absurd. A cruel joke played by a capricious fate. Officer Bailey explained, his voice softening slightly, that she had failed to appear in court. He explained that the summons had likely been mailed, but Jerry's mind reeled. She never checked the mail anymore. The mailbox, rusted and overgrown with ivy, stood at the end of the long driveway, a silent sentinel guarding a world she no longer engaged with. Bills, junk mail, the occasional sympathy card, they all piled up, unread, untouched. She hadn't the energy. She hadn't the will. But I didn't know, she stammered, her voice trembling. I didn't get anything. Officer Bailey sighed. I understand, ma'am, but there's a warrant. I don't have to take you in today, but you need to take care of this. Soon. He handed her a card with a number on it. Call this clerk. Explain your situation. Be polite. He left, the police car disappearing down the dusty road, leaving Jerry standing on her porch, the fateful notice clutched in her trembling hand. The world, already shrunk to the confines of her property, seemed to be closing in further, the walls of her self-imposed prison growing taller, thicker, more impenetrable. And the unknown darkness, previously at the edge of her perception, seemed to be growing. That evening, Mrs. Martha, her neighbor from across the way, a kind woman with a worried brow and a penchant for floral print dresses, stopped by. She'd seen the police car. She'd seen the notice, or rather, the remnants of it, clinging precariously to Jerry's door earlier that day before a gust of wind had snatched it away and carried it off into the overgrown wilderness. Jerry, dear, are you all right? Mrs. Martha asked, her voice laced with concern. Jerry tried to explain, but the words caught in her throat. She felt a rising panic, a sense of helplessness that threatened to overwhelm her. Mrs. Martha, bless her heart, tried to be helpful, but she didn't know how to navigate the legal system any more than Jerry did. And Jerry didn't even own a cell phone. She was adrift, a solitary ship lost on a stormy sea, with no compass and no map, and a warrant for her arrest looming like a monstrous wave on the horizon. The sense that something more than just a legal issue was brewing grew stronger. The next morning, Jerry awoke to a sound that was both unfamiliar and deeply unsettling. A rhythmic whirring, punctuated by the sharp crack of snapping branches and the muffled thud of something. It was coming from her yard. Fear, cold and clammy, gripped her. She hadn't felt this level of genuine fear in years. The slow, creeping dread of loneliness was one thing. This was a sharp, immediate terror. She crept to the window, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. Peeking through the dusty curtains, she saw them. For figures silhouetted against the rising sun. Boys. Young men really, though to Jerry, anyone under 40 seemed like a child. They were moving through her overgrown yard with a purposefulness that was both alarming and intriguing. Her first instinct was to call 911. Intruders. Vandals. They were here to rob her, to torment her, to she didn't know what. Her hand hovered over the ancient rotary phone, her finger trembling on the dial. But something stopped her. A flicker of something she couldn't quite name. Curiosity? Hope? Or perhaps it was simply the sheer absurdity of the situation. For boys, armed with lawnmowers and weed whackers, and were those hedge clippers? She watched them, mesmerized, as they moved through the jungle of her yard, their movements surprisingly coordinated. One, taller than the others, with a shock of blonde hair that caught the sunlight, seemed to be in charge, directing the others with quiet authority. Another, slighter with a mop of dark curls, was focused on a particularly stubborn patch of weeds, his brow furrowed in concentration. The other two, younger still, were working together to clear a path through the overgrown rose bushes, their movements careful, almost reverent. It was surreal, like a scene from a dream, a bizarre, improbable tableau unfolding before her weary eyes. Were they really mowing her lawn? Were they really helping her? The darkness that had settled over her stirred. It felt observant. The fear began to recede, replaced by a hesitant, fragile hope. But beneath that hope, a deeper question lingered, a question that echoed the unsettling feeling that had been growing within her since the police visit. Why? Why would these boys, these strangers, be doing this? It was more than just kindness. It felt ordained, as if some unseen force had orchestrated this unlikely encounter, a force that was both mysterious and strangely comforting. The air itself seemed to hum with an unspoken energy. This wasn't just about a lawn. The Reynolds were a fixture in Rockdale, a family known for their quiet strength and their unwavering willingness to lend a hand. They weren't wealthy, not by any stretch of the imagination. Mr. Reynolds worked long hours at the local hardware store, his hands calloused and worn, his back perpetually aching. Mrs. Reynolds, a woman with a warm smile and an endless supply of homemade cookies, supplemented their income by taking in sewing and mending. They lived in a modest house on the outskirts of town, a house filled with the sounds of laughter, sibling rivalry, and the comforting aroma of Mrs. Reynolds' cooking. Blaine, at 17, was the eldest. He was the anchor of the family, the responsible one, the one his younger brothers looked up to. He had a quiet intensity about him, a deep-seated sense of empathy that extended beyond his immediate family. He'd inherited his grandmother's gentle nature, her unwavering belief in the power of kindness. It was she who had taught him to look out for the vulnerable, to offer help where it was needed, to be a light in the darkness. She had passed away 2 years ago, but her words, her lessons, remained etched in his heart. And her passing had left a void, a subtle emptiness that Blaine unconsciously filled by helping others. Ethan, 15, was the artist, the dreamer. He saw the world through a different lens, a lens that filtered out the mundane and focused on the beauty that lay hidden beneath the surface. He had a natural affinity for plants, a green thumb that seemed to coax life from even the most barren soil. He could spend hours in the garden, lost in his own world, his hands moving with a grace and precision that belied his age. He saw the potential in Jerry's overgrown yard, the sleeping beauty waiting to be awakened. He also felt something else about the yard, a strange resonance, a feeling he couldn't quite articulate. It drew him. The 2 younger brothers, Caleb, 13, and Liam, 11, were a whirlwind of energy, always eager to help, always ready for an adventure. Caleb was the comedian, the one who could lighten any situation with his infectious laughter. Liam was the quiet observer, the one who noticed the details that others missed. They were a team, these 4 brothers, bound together by blood, by love, and by a shared sense of purpose. It was Blaine who had seen the news report. A small, local station, desperate for content, had run a segment on the elderly woman facing arrest for an overgrown lawn. The reporter, a young woman with overly enthusiastic delivery, had painted Jerry as a victim of bureaucratic overreach, a lonely widow struggling to cope. The camera had panned across Jerry's overgrown yard, a visual testament to her plight. Blaine had watched the report with a growing sense of unease. He saw the fear in Jerry's eyes, the helplessness in her posture. He saw the neglected garden, a reflection of her inner turmoil. He remembered his grandmother, her struggles with her own yard in her final years. And he knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that he had to do something. It was more than empathy. It was a calling. Ethan, seeing the report over Blaine's shoulder, had felt that same strange pull, that resonance he'd experienced before. He saw the potential beauty buried beneath the weeds, the promise of a garden restored. He saw something else, too, a flicker of something ancient, something powerful, hidden within the overgrown tangle. The conversation that followed was brief, unspoken understanding passing between the brothers. No grand pronouncements, no dramatic speeches, just a shared nod, a silent agreement. They would help Mrs. Suttle. They would clear her yard. They would, in their own small way, bring a little light back into her life. Mrs. Reynolds, overhearing their quiet discussion, had simply smiled. She knew her boys. She knew their hearts. She packed them a cooler full of sandwiches and lemonade, her blessing unspoken but deeply felt. There was a pride in her eyes, a quiet understanding that her sons were doing something truly good, something necessary. She, too, felt a subtle shift in the air, a sense of anticipation, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. The sun was already climbing high in the sky when the Reynolds brothers arrived at Jerry's house, their pickup truck loaded with tools. The air was thick with the promise of another scorching Texas day. The yard was even more overgrown than it had appeared on television, a daunting task that would have discouraged most. But the brothers were undeterred. They had a mission, a purpose, and they were determined to see it through. Blaine, taking charge, surveyed the scene with a practiced eye. He divided the yard into sections, assigning tasks to each brother based on their strengths. Ethan, naturally, was put in charge of the rose garden, his hands already itching to get to work. Caleb and Liam, the younger ones, were tasked with clearing the pathways, their energy and enthusiasm a valuable asset. The work was hard, grueling. The grass, thick and tangled, resisted the blades of the old, borrowed lawnmower. The weeds, their roots firmly entrenched in the hardened soil, clung stubbornly to life. The Texas heat beat down mercilessly, sweat soaking their shirts, stinging their eyes. The old lawnmower, a relic from a bygone era, sputtered and coughed, threatening to give up the ghost at any moment. Blaine coaxed it along, his hands steady on the handle, his voice a low murmur of encouragement. He treated the machine like a temperamental old friend, understanding its quirks, respecting its limitations. There was something almost spiritual about his connection to the tools, to the land, to the task at hand. He felt a connection, too, to something older, deeper, something he could not name. Ethan, meanwhile, was lost in his own world, his hands moving with a surgeon's precision as he pruned the overgrown rose bushes. He carefully removed the deadwood, untangled the thorny vines, his touch gentle, almost reverent. He could feel the life force within the plants, their silent plea for release. He could almost hear their whispers, their gratitude. He felt that strange resonance again, stronger now, emanating from the heart of the rose garden. It was a feeling of potential, of power waiting to be unleashed. Caleb and Liam, armed with weed whackers and clippers, attacked the overgrown pathways with youthful exuberance. They laughed and joked, their energy seemingly boundless, their enthusiasm infectious. They were clearing more than just weeds. They were clearing a path for hope, for healing, for a new beginning. They were unconsciously acting as conduits for something larger. The hours passed, marked by the rhythmic whir of the lawnmower, the sharp snip of the clippers, the occasional shout of laughter or encouragement. The yard, slowly but surely, began to transform. Order emerged from chaos, beauty from neglect. The air, thick with the scent of freshly cut grass and the sweet fragrance of roses, seemed to hum with a renewed energy. It was as if the land itself was breathing a sigh of relief. Jerry watched them from the window, her hands clasped tightly together, her eyes wide with disbelief. The fear that had gripped her for so long began to dissipate, replaced by a wave of emotion so profound, so overwhelming, that it brought tears to her eyes. They weren't tears of sadness, not this time. They were tears of gratitude, of relief, of wonder. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. These boys, these strangers, were transforming her yard, her prison, into a sanctuary. They were, without even realizing it, healing not just her garden, but her soul. She watched Blaine, his brow furrowed in concentration as he wrestled with the old lawnmower, his movements strong and sure. She saw Ethan, his hands moving with such delicate care as he tended to the roses, his face alight with a passion that mirrored her own long-lost love for gardening. She saw Caleb and Liam, their youthful energy a vibrant contrast to the stillness that had settled over her life. She saw, in their selfless act, a reflection of the goodness that still existed in the world, a goodness that she had almost forgotten. She saw a glimmer of hope, a spark of light in the darkness that had enveloped her for so long. The tears streamed down her wrinkled cheeks, each drop a testament to the unexpected kindness unfolding before her. They were tears of release, of catharsis, of a heart slowly thawing after years of frozen grief. They were tears of recognition, too. Recognition of something more. She felt the shift in the energy, the same subtle hum that the boys felt, but for Jerry, it resonated with memories. With George, with a love that transcended time and space. The darkness that had been creeping in, the unknown force, seemed to recede, to acknowledge the light that these boys brought. It was as if a silent battle was being waged, a battle between despair and hope, between neglect and renewal. And for the first time in a long time, hope was winning. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the newly cleared yard, Jerry finally ventured outside. The transformation was breathtaking. What had been a chaotic wilderness was now a semblance of order, a testament to the boys' tireless efforts. The air, still warm from the day's heat, was filled with the sweet scent of freshly cut grass and the delicate perfume of roses, newly freed from their thorny prison. She approached the boys slowly, her steps hesitant, her heart overflowing with a gratitude she struggled to express. They had stopped working, their faces flushed with exertion, their clothes covered in dirt and grass clippings. They looked up as she approached, their expressions a mixture of weariness and satisfaction. "Boys," she began, her voice trembling slightly. I don't know what to say." Blaine, wiping his brow with the back of his hand, offered her a gentle smile. "No need to say anything, ma'am. We were just glad to help." "But why?" Jerry asked, the question that had been nagging at her all day finally escaping her lips. "Why would you do this for me? You don't even know me." Ethan stepped forward, his eyes shining with an intensity that belied his youth. "We saw you on the news," he said, his voice soft but firm. "We saw that you needed help." He paused, searching for the right words. And it just felt right. He couldn't explain the pull, the strange resonance he felt, the sense of something ancient and powerful stirring in the garden. He didn't think she'd understand. Caleb and Liam, ever the energetic duo, chimed in. "Yeah, it was no big deal." Caleb grinned. "We like mowing lawns," Liam added, nodding enthusiastically. Jerry looked at them, her eyes welling up with tears again. These weren't just ordinary boys. There was something special about them, something extraordinary. She felt a connection to them, a bond forged not by blood, but by something deeper, something spiritual. "Come in," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Come in and have some lemonade." "And I baked a pie. Apple, George's favorite." The boys exchanged glances, a silent agreement passing between them. They followed Jerry into the house, the scent of apple pie and a hint of something else, something floral, yet earthy, filling the air. The house, though cluttered and dusty, felt welcoming. It felt like a sanctuary. The conversation flowed easily, awkwardly at first, then with a growing warmth. Jerry learned about their family, their lives, their dreams. The boys learned about George, about the rose garden, about the life Jerry had lived within these walls. They listened, truly listened, as Jerry spoke, her voice gaining strength with each word. She felt heard, seen, valued. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone. The presence she'd felt before, in the garden, seemed to be inside now, too. A gentle warmth, a comforting weight. As they ate the pie, its crust golden and flaky, its filling sweet and tart, a sense of peace settled over the small kitchen. It was a simple moment, a shared meal, a connection forged between strangers. But it was also something more. It was a testament to the power of human kindness, the transformative power of compassion. It was magic, a quiet, unassuming, deeply powerful magic. The transformation of Jerry's yard didn't go unnoticed. Mrs. Martha, ever vigilant, had been watching the boys' progress throughout the day. She brought them cold water and sandwiches earlier, her heart swelling with pride and gratitude. She'd also made a few phone calls. Soon, other neighbors began to appear, drawn by the activity, by the sight of the once overgrown yard slowly but surely being reclaimed. They brought more food, more drinks, more offers of help. They stood on the sidelines, watching, admiring, their faces reflecting a mixture of awe and appreciation. The air buzzed with conversation, with laughter, with a sense of shared purpose. The community, once fragmented and disconnected, was coming together, united by a single act of kindness. It was as if the boys' efforts had not only cleared Jerry's yard, but had also cleared away the barriers that had separated neighbors for so long. Then, the news van arrived. Sarah Miller, the young, ambitious reporter from the local station, the same one who had done the original story on Jerry, stepped out, her microphone in hand, her cameraman in tow. She recognized the Reynolds brothers immediately. "We're back at the home of Jerry Suttle," she began, her voice brimming with excitement, "where an incredible story of community spirit is unfolding. These four young men, the Reynolds brothers, have taken it upon themselves to clear Mrs. Suttle's yard, saving her from a potential arrest warrant." The camera panned across the scene, capturing the boys' exhausted but happy faces, Jerry's tearful gratitude, the neighbors' supportive presence. Sarah interviewed Blaine, then Ethan, then Jerry. Their words, simple but heartfelt, resonated with viewers across the county. The story, initially a small, local piece, quickly gained traction. It was picked up by larger news outlets, shared on social media, going viral within hours. Comments poured in, praising the boys' selflessness, Jerry's resilience, the community's spirit. People were touched, inspired, moved by this simple act of kindness. It was a reminder that even in a world often filled with darkness, there was still light, still hope, still the potential for extraordinary good. The subtle, magical undercurrent felt by Jerry and the boys seemed to be amplified, spreading outwards, touching everyone who encountered the story. Among those who saw the news report was Arthur Miller, a semi-retired lawyer with a soft spot for the underdog and a reputation for taking on pro bono cases. He watched the story, his heart aching for Jerry, his admiration growing for the Reynolds brothers. He saw the injustice of the situation, the absurdity of a 75-year-old woman facing arrest for an overgrown lawn. He saw something else, too, a flicker of something familiar, a resonance. He'd felt it before, in other cases where justice seemed to be intertwined with something more. He picked up the phone and called the news station, asking for Jerry Suttle's contact information. He then called Jerry, his voice calm and reassuring. "Mrs. Suttle," he said, "my name is Arthur Miller. I'm an attorney. I saw the news report and I'd like to offer my services free of charge. I believe I can help you resolve this matter." Jerry, overwhelmed by this further act of kindness, could barely speak. "But I can't afford." "Don't worry about that, ma'am," Arthur interrupted gently. "This one's on me. Consider it a contribution to the community." He felt that pull again, that sense of being guided, of being part of something larger than himself. The legal process was surprisingly swift. Arthur Miller, with his years of experience and his sharp legal mind, navigated the bureaucratic maze with ease. He contacted the court, explained Jerry's situation, presented evidence of the yard's remediation. He argued that the warrant was unjust, that Jerry had never received the initial summons, that she was a vulnerable member of the community who deserved compassion, not punishment. The judge, after reviewing the evidence and listening to Arthur Miller's impassioned plea, agreed. The warrant was rescinded. The case was dismissed. Jerry was free. The relief that washed over Jerry was palpable. It was as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders, a burden she had carried for far too long. She felt a renewed sense of hope, a belief in the possibility of a brighter future. The darkness that had threatened to consume her had retreated, replaced by a light that shone brighter than ever before. The light that the Reynolds brothers, and now Arthur Miller, had brought into her life. And the presence, it was stronger now, clearer. A feeling of gratitude, of love. The following weeks brought a transformation that extended far beyond Jerry Suttle's yard. The once overgrown garden, now meticulously tended by Ethan Reynolds, with occasional help from his brothers, blossomed into a vibrant tapestry of color and life. Roses, George's beloved roses, bloomed in profusion, their fragrant petals unfurling in the warm Texas sun. Tomatoes ripened on the vine, their plump, red skins gleaming with health. The air hummed with the buzz of bees, the chirping of crickets, the songs of birds, a symphony of life that had been absent for far too long. But the most significant change was in Jerry herself. The lines of worry that had etched themselves onto her face seemed to soften, replaced by a gentle glow. The spark that had been extinguished by grief and loneliness rekindled, flickering brightly within her eyes. She rediscovered her love for gardening, her hands, though gnarled and weathered, moving with a renewed purpose. She wasn't just tending plants, she was tending her soul. The Reynolds brothers became regular visitors, stopping by after school or on weekends to help with the heavier tasks, to share a glass of lemonade, to simply sit and chat with Jerry. They had become more than just helpers. They had become friends, family, a connection to the world that Jerry had so desperately needed. Blaine, with his quiet wisdom, offered her companionship and understanding. Ethan, with his green thumb and his gentle soul, shared her passion for the garden. Caleb and Liam, with their infectious energy, brought laughter and joy back into her life. And Jerry gave them something in return. She shared her stories, her wisdom, her memories of a life well lived. She baked them pies. She mended their clothes. She offered them a listening ear and a warm heart. She became a surrogate grandmother, a source of unconditional love and support. The presence that had lingered, first in the garden, then in the house, now seemed to emanate from Jerry herself. It was a warmth, a light, a sense of peace that enveloped everyone who came near. It felt ancient, powerful, and deeply good. The town of Rockdale, touched by the story of Jerry Suttle and the Reynolds brothers, decided to honor their extraordinary act of kindness. A small ceremony was held in the town square, attended by neighbors, friends, and even the mayor himself. The Reynolds brothers, uncomfortable with the attention, stood awkwardly on the stage, their faces flushed with embarrassment. Blaine, ever the spokesman, accepted the award on behalf of his brothers, his voice humble and sincere. "We didn't do anything special," he said, his gaze sweeping across the crowd. "We just saw someone who needed help, and we helped. That's what neighbors do. That's what anyone should do." His words resonated deeply with the audience. It was a simple message, but a powerful one. A reminder that even the smallest act of kindness can have a profound impact, that compassion and empathy can change lives, can heal wounds, can build bridges. The local newspaper ran a front-page story on the ceremony, featuring a photo of Jerry and the four boys, their faces beaming with pride and happiness. The story was picked up by national news outlets, spreading the message of hope and community spirit across the country. Scholarships were offered to the boys, donations poured in for Jerry. Offers of help came from far and wide. The initial ripple of kindness had become a tidal wave of goodwill. But for Jerry and the Reynolds brothers, the greatest reward was not the accolades or the attention. It was the connection they had forged, the bond they had created, the knowledge that they had made a difference in each other's lives. It was the quiet satisfaction of seeing a garden bloom, a life restored, a community united. Years passed. The rose garden continued to flourish, a testament to the enduring power of love and care. Jerry, though frail, remained active and engaged, her spirit undimmed by the passage of time. The Reynolds brothers grew into young men, each pursuing their own paths, but always remaining close to Jerry, always cherishing the bond they had formed. The story of Jerry Suttle and the Reynolds brothers became a local legend, a reminder that even in the most ordinary of circumstances, extraordinary things can happen. It was a story about kindness, about community, about the transformative power of human connection. It was a story about the subtle magic that weaves its way through our lives, connecting us in ways we may not always understand. And for those who knew the full story, for those who had felt the presence, the subtle shift in the energy, the unexplained connection between Jerry, the garden, and the boys, it was a story about something more. It was a story about the unseen forces that shape our destinies, the ancient wisdom that whispers in the wind, the enduring power of love that transcends time and space. It was a reminder that sometimes the greatest miracles are found not in grand gestures, but in the simple act of reaching out to another human being, of offering a helping hand, of sharing a moment of kindness. One evening, as the sun set, casting a golden glow over the rose garden. Jerry sat on her porch, a gentle smile on her lips. She watched the fireflies dance among the blossoms, their tiny lights flickering like stars in the twilight. She felt a sense of peace, of contentment, of gratitude. She was not alone. She was surrounded by love, by friendship, by the enduring spirit of community. And she knew, deep in her heart, that even though George was gone, he was still with her, in the scent of the roses, in the warmth of the sun, in the love that bloomed eternally in her garden and in her heart. The presence was there, too, stronger than ever, a gentle, loving, eternal embrace. The darkness was gone. Only the light remained. The story of Jerry Suttle and the Reynolds brothers offers a profound lesson in the interconnectedness of humanity and the transformative power of simple kindness. It underscores that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges, loneliness, grief, bureaucratic hurdles, the compassionate actions of others can create ripples of positive change that extend far beyond the immediate situation. The boy's willingness to help a stranger, driven not by obligation, but by a deep-seated empathy and an almost intuitive understanding of her need, highlights the inherent goodness that resides within us all. Their actions sparked a chain reaction, revitalizing not only Jerry's garden, but also her spirit and the sense of community within Rockdale. It reminds us that we are not isolated individuals, but rather threads in a larger tapestry, and that even the smallest act of generosity can weave beauty and strength into the fabric of life. The story also subtly hints at a deeper, more mystical connection, suggesting that perhaps unseen forces, a universal energy of compassion and love, can guide us towards acts of kindness and bring about unexpected healing and restoration. Beyond the immediate impact on Jerry's life, the story carries a broader message about the importance of recognizing and nurturing the inherent worth of every individual, especially those who are vulnerable or marginalized. It challenges us to look beyond superficial appearances and societal judgments, to see the shared humanity that binds us together. The viral spread of the story speaks to a deep-seated yearning within people for positive narratives, for reminders that goodness and compassion still exist in a world often dominated by negativity. It encourages us to actively cultivate empathy, to be mindful of the needs of others, and to step forward, even in small ways, to offer support and connection. Ultimately, the tale is a quiet testament to the enduring power of love, the resilience of the human spirit, and the subtle, often unseen, magic that blossoms when we choose kindness over indifference, community over isolation, and hope over despair. It whispers a truth, that by tending to the gardens of others, we also nurture our own.